my new city. And I started following a Facebook page that covers some of the history of Waco, and it shows old photographs and stuff like that. And somebody posted a photo from 1906 that was like a postcard, and somebody commented on that photo that that was 1 year before the Waco horror. And I'd never heard of the Waco horror, so I decided to look into it. Now, it turns out that might have been a typo, because it was actually 10 years before the Waco horror. The Waco horror happened in 1916. And what it basically was is a young black child, a young black man, 17-year-old Jesse Washington was accused of murdering a 53-year-old white woman named Lucy Fryer. And within 7 days, he was tried, convicted by an all-white jury who only deliberated for 4 minutes, and then pulled out of the courtroom by a mob and lynched and burned alive. This was a very horrible story, and I'm going to tell you the story of that today. We're going to go visit the grave of Lucy, and then we're going to go to the courthouse where this happened. I don't know if I'll be able to get actually into the courtroom, but I'll put pictures of what the courtroom looked like. And we're going to take the final path that Jesse did from the courtroom to where he ultimately met his demise. Like I said, I apologize, this is a horrible story, but I feel it needs to be told, even if nobody really feels comfortable watching it. It's one of those things that we need to remember, because, as they say, those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And things like this can never, ever happen again. I hope you'll come along. Now, as I said before, I only heard about this story for the first time about 3 days ago when I saw that comment on the Facebook page. But I spent the last 3 days researching this story, really getting into all the grisly details, reading reports, reading news reports, watching videos on the subject. The NAACP was brought in. In fact, this was one of the watershed moments that led to the NAACP becoming a real civil rights organization. And it was also a key event that led to many anti-lynching laws. So, like I said, I read the report by the NAACP. One of the problems was in the 7-day period between when the murder happened and when the lynching happened, there was like daily reports in the news about what was going on. And then after the lynching happened, and the city of Waco just was really embarrassed about how bad it made them look, and they stopped talking about it. And so the NAACP said, we need to figure out what happened. And they sent an investigator down to look at what really happened. She interviewed people, talked to witnesses, and compiled an 8-page report, which was posted in a magazine, which was published in a magazine called The Crisis. And that is probably the best detailing of the events of this, and is largely based on, and what I'm going to tell you today and show you today is based largely on the reporting in that article. So here we go. This is the Lorena Cemetery in Lorena, Texas, about 6 miles south of Waco, and we are at the grave of Lucy Fryer. She is the other victim in this horrible story. She is the mother of two, 53 years old at her death, the mother of two, and her husband George, of course, is buried right here. The rest of the Fryer. And the doctor reported that there was evidence that she had been raped as well as murdered. It's believed that she was hit over the head with a hammer, and that was what delivered the lethal blow. Well, it didn't take long for the police to suspect that Jesse or some of his family, because he had a number of brothers and sisters, and it didn't take them long to figure out that he was potentially a suspect in this. Turns out they arrested the whole family, questioned them, and let all of them but Jesse go. So this is a McClellan County courthouse. However, was getting some more cottonseed from Lucy in the barn, and apparently Lucy was scolding him for mistreating the mules. There's talk that he had a bit of a temper, and allegedly he attacked her, raped and murdered her, and then just basically walked away. Her oldest child, a daughter, found Lucy dead in the barn, and the police were immediately called, and the doctor reported that there was evidence that she had been raped as well as murdered. It's believed that she was hit over the head with a hammer, and that was what delivered the lethal blow. Well, it didn't take long for the police to suspect that Jesse or some of his family, because he had a number of brothers and sisters, and it didn't take him long to figure out that he was potentially a suspect in this. Turns out they arrested the whole family, questioned them, and let all of them but Jesse go. So this is a McClellan County courthouse where the trial of Jesse Washington occurred. I'm actually going to read the report directly from the NAACP on this whole story, because I think it's the best accounting that I've heard of what actually happened here. It starts off, Section 2 talks about the crime. It starts off, near the county town of Robinson, some 6 miles from Waco, lived a white family of 4 named Fryer, who owned a small farm. This they cultivated themselves with the help of a hired man, 17-year-old Jesse Washington. Jesse was a big, well-developed fellow, but ignorant and being unable to read or write. He seemed to have been sullen and perhaps mentally deficient, with a strong and even daring temper. On Monday, May 8th, Mr. Fryer and his son, 14, and his daughter, 23, were hoeing cotton in part of one of their farms. The boy, Jesse, was plowing with his mules and sowing cottonseed near the house where Mrs. Fryer was alone. He went into the house for more cottonseed. As Mrs. Fryer was scooping it up for him into a bag which he held, she scolded him for beating the mules. He knocked her down with a blacksmith hammer, and as he confessed, criminally assaulted her. Finally, he killed her with the hammer. The boy then returned to the field, finished the work, and went home to his cabin, where he lived with his father, mother, and several brothers and sisters. When the murdered woman was discovered, suspicion pointed to Jesse Washington. He was found sitting in his yard whittling a stick. He was arrested and immediately taken to jail in Waco. Tuesday, a mob visited the jail. They came in with about 30 automobiles, each holding as many as could be crowded in. With no noise, no tooting of horns, the lights were dim, and some had no lights at all. These were all Robinson people. They looked for the boy, but could not find him, for he'd been taken to a neighboring county where the sheriff obtained a confession for him. Another mob went to this county to get the boy, but he was again removed to Dallas. Finally, the Robinson people pledged themselves not to lynch the boy if the authorities acted properly and if the boy would waive his legal rights. The second confession, which the boy waived all his legal rights, was obtained in the Dallas jail. The grand jury indicted him on Thursday, and the case was set for trial Monday on May 15th. Sunday night at midnight, Jesse Washington was brought from Dallas to Waco and secreted into the office of the judge. But there was not the slightest doubt that he would be tried and hanged the next day if the law took its course. There was some, but not much doubt of his guilt. His confessions were all obtained, of course, under duress, and were perhaps suspiciously clear that not entirely in the boy's own words. It seems, however, probable that the boy was guilty of murder and possibly of premeditated rape. Jesse Washington was asked what he thought about the mob coming after him. He said, "They promised they would not if I tell them about it," and he seemed not to care, but was thoroughly indifferent. The trial was hurried through. The Waco Semi-Weekly Tribune, May 17, said the jury returned into court at 11:22 a.m. after 4 minutes of deliberating and returned a guilty verdict. It said essentially, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder as charged in the indictment and assess his punishment at death." This was signed by W.B. Brazelton, the foreman. The judge asked, "Is this your verdict, gentlemen?" And they answered yes. Judge Monroe began writing in his docket. He had written May 15th, 1916 jury verdict of guilty, and as he wrote, there was a hush over the entire courtroom. It was a moment of hesitation, but just a moment. Then a tall man started over the heads of the crowd. Fred H. Kingsbury, who was standing alongside the Judge Monroe, said, "They're coming after him." And as the judge looked up, a wave of people surged forward. The courtroom accommodates 500 people, but the judge had allowed 1,500 people to crowd in. The investigator continues, "The stenographer told me that there was a pause for a full minute. He knew the people crowded around him and he knew what was coming. So he slipped out the door back of the sheriff with his records, and the sheriff slipped out also." Fleming claims that all he was called upon to do in the way of protecting the boy was to get him into court. A big fellow in the back of the courtroom yelled, "Get the N-word." Barney Goldberg, one of the deputy sheriffs, told me that he did not know that Fleming had dropped the orders to let them get the Negro and pulled his revolver. Afterwards, he got his friends to swear in an affidavit that he was not present. So this is the back of the courtroom right now, and the 54th court was this set of windows right here, and it was actually two levels. I'll show you a picture from about 30 years later right here of what the inside of the courtroom looked like. Now, I was just up there a few minutes ago looking at it, and they've remodeled it now. The third and fourth floor are separate. I couldn't get in there to do any filming because they have no filming policy, and at the time it looked like there were some police officers that were actually using the courtroom as a break room. Looks like they were having their lunch in there. But anyway, this is in back of the courtroom, or in back of the building that we were just looking at a moment ago. And once the crowd surged and grabbed Jesse, they came down the back set of a stairway in the back of the building, and we'll go look at that in a minute, and came out and came down this alleyway here on their way to the city hall. The mob grabbed Jesse, dragged him down this stairwell and out of this door right here, and then began heading down this alleyway. As they continued, they ripped his clothes off and wrapped a chain around his body and began dragging him through the streets behind a vehicle. Their goal was to take him over to the local bridge, the Waco Suspension Bridge, by the way, which we visited a while back, and they were going to hang him there. And I'll show you how close that all is. We're actually going to just walk the whole path here. As they were doing this, at one point, people started throwing bricks at him, started stabbing him as he walked down, as he was dragged down the street. Eventually, the chain broke, and they reattached the chain around his wrists and began dragging him through the streets by his wrists. And as that happened, people were throwing bricks at him and stabbing him. At one point, somebody cut off one of his ears, and at another point, another person came up and literally castrated him. Now, this is Washington Avenue here, right in front of where the courtroom is. And they literally just headed right down this way here. I need to be on the other side of the street, so we're going to cross over right here. But as you look right now, Washington Boulevard goes right down there to that bridge. Now, that bridge wasn't there at this time but that was kind of the northwest corner of what they call the square at the time, where the city hall was. Like I said, Jesse is being dragged down the street right now, bound by a chain wrapped around his wrists. and the mob is throwing bricks at him and stabbing him and beating him and cutting him. This big building in front of us right now, that's current City Hall. That building was torn. Well, that building was built in 1928, about 12 years after this event happened. But the old courthouse, or the old City Hall, was in the same exact position that this one is right now, and there was a square going around it, and the buildings that are all behind it now, that's all part of the convention center. None of that was there. And like I said, the streets just went all the way around the City Hall building and then joined back together kind of parallel with Austin, which is this street right here. And so they went around the courthouse, or went around the City Hall, and we're going to go lynch him on the Waco Suspension Bridge. And we'll actually walk all the way over there. So this street right here is Austin, and it's right in front of the City Hall. And the city square basically is still sort of lined out with the way the roads go right now, going around it. And it went around the City Hall. And then joined back together. The two went around both sides and joined back together. And then it went right directly onto the Waco Suspension Bridge, as you can see by this photo that I'm putting up now. This was still actually the old City Hall building, because the old City Hall building was a little deeper than the current one is. Probably went back to about where this brick wall is here. Now, this was all businesses back here, as you remember from this photo here. But there, you can see the Waco Suspension Bridge over there. Let's see if we can get around this. This is a courtyard for the hotel, so I'm guessing they don't want people over there and going through there, but that used to just be a road going through there. And the objective was that they were going to take him over the bridge and hang him on the bridge. And that was done basically because there was history of that. About 12 years earlier, in 1905, another black man was lynched, and he was actually hanged right there on the bridge. And so that was where the crowd was originally going to go. They got over to the bridge, and somebody said, oh, they're building a fire over behind the City Hall, and we can hang him over there and we can burn him alive. And so all of a sudden the crowd turned around and headed back from the bridge back to the City Hall. So yeah, that's literally right into the bridge. So they were going to hang him right there on the bridge, just like they had done with St. Majors. But like I said, they got word that, hey, they're setting up a fire behind the City Hall. Let's go back over there. And so they did. All right, so here we are back at the old City Hall. Now, it took me a long time to figure out exactly where the lynching probably occurred. This is actually in back of the City Hall. And I had one of the reports I read said that it happened behind the City Hall, which makes sense because if they come back from the suspension bridge, the suspension bridge was literally straight through there. And so this would have been the first place I got. And it took a while, however, to figure it out exactly where the lynching took place. But what I did do is I was able to find one picture, this picture right here. And if you zoom way in on the edge of the photo, there is a picture of a building that you can see the word X Goodman Liquor Company. You see it right here in this picture. And I did some research and I found an old newspaper ad from before 1916 that gave an address of where the building was. And the building was literally right over there. They said it was, the advertisement actually said it was on the south side of the square. And so it was literally right here. And so since the image, basically showed from this direction and all of the fires were here, and then the building, the liquor building was over there, it's clear that the lynching probably happened right about where these trees are. What they did, at this point, they tied the chain around Jesse's neck. There was a lot of dispute between a lot of the reports that I read about whether the fire was set after he was put up on the tree or if it was burning when he arrived. But as the NAACP report indicates, a lot of the photos showed that people were lining up. Maybe 15,000 is the estimate of how many people were here. And they're saying that was like half the population of Waco. We're already here when Jesse was brought back to the city hall. And the fire was already burning, and they showed pictures of the fire burning prior to Jesse's arrival. So that literally happened right here on this corner, right here in this whole area here. Unfortunately, there aren't any markers whatsoever to indicate